This is the Earth to World Broadcasting Network.
Can we all remember back a few years ago when the subject of employment or unemployment in the state of Oregon and the Portland metro area was just plain boring and uneventful? Sure, we were always a little worse than the national average, but we rationalized the blip with our great quality of life. 5%, 5.2%, 5.9%, 6%. It kind of became the norm. We were in a very comfortable, nearly full employment state. Much different deal now. There's a saying that goes something like this: an acceptable level of unemployment means that the government economist to whom it is acceptable still has a job. Sorry, Amy, I couldn't resist. Amy Vander Vliet is the coolest government economist, trust me. She is a regional economist for the Oregon Employment Department covering the Portland metropolitan area. She produces and analyzes employment statistics, including the unemployment rate and monthly job growth in the region's major industries. Let me present to you the awesome Amy.
Thank you, Steve. It's not often that economists are welcomed so warmly these days. Good morning. You know, I was talking to a friend last week. I was telling her that I was going to be late to happy hour because I was working on these really cool slides for this presentation today. Without missing a beat, she said, "But the economy hasn't changed. Can't you just use the same slides from last time?" And, you know, I completely understand where she's coming from. Yes, we're still in a recovery. No, it still doesn't feel much like one. But things have gotten better. Our unemployment rate is down from a year ago, both here in Portland, in Oregon, and nationally. And that's the good news. The bad news is that it hasn't budged since April. All three of these areas are essentially where we were 5 months ago. So after the spurt of growth or falling unemployment rate that we saw earlier this year and late last year, Oregon's sort of in a holding pattern right now. And we're not alone. This is where everyone was in April of this year. And green is good. No offense to Beavers fans out there. And the darker green, the better. So look at it, it's lush and it's green, and you have falling unemployment, and you have more jobs, and you have people able to work more hours, and so everything is looking okay. Fast forward to August. Pink isn't very good. Maroon is worse. Most states have seen their economies worsen since April, just like Oregon. And poor Nevada and Michigan, they can't get a break. I'm calling this the start-stop recovery, or the recovery that can't make up its mind. So look at that. In 2010, you start. Oh, but in the summer of 2010, you stop. Fall and winter, start. This past spring, stop. So all in all, we're only averaging about 1,600 jobs a month here in Oregon. And typically, in a typical recovery, you would see about 4,000 jobs being created every month. But we're not in a typical recovery because we weren't in a typical recession. This recession was caused by a financial crisis. Not by inflation, not by monetary policy, not by oil prices, not by a dot-com bust. This recession was, you know, most of us aren't old enough to remember the last time that the US had a recession caused by a financial crisis. That's because we haven't had one since before World War II. But other developed countries have. And this is what happens. In a typical financial crisis, you see huge declines in equity. You see falling house prices. You have falling GDP per capita. You have a big run-up in government debt. And you have an unemployment rate that goes up by 7 percentage points. Our recession, in orange, I didn't do this, Beaver fans, intentionally. Our recession is pretty similar to your garden variety financial crisis recession. We did a little better in some areas, a little worse in others. Our unemployment rate didn't go up as much, but our house prices have fallen further, and they're still falling. We also didn't lose as many jobs, as crazy as that sounds, as your typical financial crisis. So all this is to say that a financial crisis hurts. If our past recessions were something like a broken leg or even a shattered collarbone, this recession is like a bad blood infection. It's not just isolated to one area of the body. It spreads everywhere. It causes a lot of damage, and it takes a long time to heal. So if you've been wondering why this recovery is taking so long, this is a large reason why. Back in Oregon, the recession impacted a lot of people in a lot of different ways. I know I could slice and dice the data for hours, but I've chosen just a few trends that I thought you might find interesting, being professionals in the multifamily housing fields. First one is about incomes. Incomes fell during the recession here in Portland, in Oregon, and nationally. The Great Recession, or the Little Depression, depending upon who you talk to, wiped out most of the gains that we've seen over the past decade in income. Oregon's median household income has fallen back down to 2002 levels. In Portland, household income fell 10% during the recession, steeper than the national decline that we saw of 6%. Another trend I want to point out, population growth. Population growth slowed dramatically during this recession. Most of our population growth here in Oregon comes from net immigration. People move here from other states, we all know the story, but just as significant as people moving in is that once you're in Oregon, whether you move here or whether you're born here, you don't leave. But during this recession, that changed. We saw net in-migration, which is those orange bars. We saw net in-migration slow to a crawl. No doubt fewer people were moving to Oregon. That's not unusual in a recession, especially when we have such a high unemployment rate here. But I think what we also saw, I'm pretty sure what we also saw, is that people left Oregon, and probably in numbers that we haven't seen since the recession of the early 80s. So a few highlights of recent trends. Unemployment rate, statewide, 9.6%. That's pretty close to the national 9.1% or 9.2, I forget. We have the highest, or 14th highest, unemployment rate in the nation. And I say that with a bit of a smile because that's actually pretty good by Oregon standards. There have been many, many months when we've had the top 1, 2, 3, or 5 unemployment rate in the nation. Over the year, we've added 27,000 jobs. That's an increase of 1.7%. And we're growing faster than the nation. The nation's at 1.1% right now. And get a hold of this. We're the 15th fastest growing state, as measured by jobs, in the country. Earlier this year, it was even better. We were the 5th fastest growing state, I think back in February. But most of these jobs were created towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year. We've bounced up and down since March for the last 5 or 6 months, but essentially we're back to where we were, just like the unemployment rate in March, where we were in March. But that's a little misleading. We have seen growth since March. It's all been in the private sector. At the same time we've seen growth in the private sector, we've seen losses in government. 10,000 layoffs in government since March, mostly in schools. So these private sector gains that we've seen in March have been offset by layoffs in the public sector. If you look at just the private sector, we've added 8,000 jobs since March and 34,000 jobs over the year. So if you're into rankings, I have another one for you. We have the 7th fastest growing private sector in the country. Exports are a bright spot. They're up 6% so far this year. We had a little bit of a slowdown earlier this year, and they were up 20% last year. And most of our large trading partners are in the Pacific Rim, which is a good thing these days. We don't want to be trading with Greece. And these guys are still buying Oregon products, things like wheat and computer chips and machinery and chemicals. Manufacturing is another bright spot. and exports have a lot to do with that, but so does the increase we've seen nationally in business spending. There are a lot of companies here in Portland and Oregon that make products and provide services for other companies. And these other companies have been spending money. They've been ramping up their inventories, they've been investing in new equipment, and Oregon has benefited from that. But the traditional engines of growth coming out of a recession haven't shown up. Government, as we've seen, is down, and it's been a drag on the economy, and typically government will help us recover. And the housing market also often leads recoveries, and in this recovery, it's actually been a drag. And neither of those things are going to change anytime soon. We'll continue to see layoffs in government, and the housing market will remain weak for at least the immediate future. So we got through the soft patch in 2010, and now we're facing the headwinds of 2011. State and local governments are struggling to balance their budgets and laying off a lot of people in the process. All the debate about debt limits in DC and the lack of consensus about policy is not helping. We've seen rising gas and commodity prices, although some of that's come down recently. And Greece and Europe are becoming more of a concern. So we're closer to the edge. Not quite teetering, but a little too close for comfort. Economists are now saying that there's about a 40% chance of falling back into a recession. This is up from what they were saying earlier this year, and I think the deteriorating situation in DC and in Europe have a lot to do with that. But Oregon and Portland will follow the US business cycle. We might not follow step by step, but Oregon has never missed a national recession, and we've never missed a national recovery. We're not as independent as we like to think. So yes, Virginia, we're still in a recovery, but it won't be a strong bounce back. There's no magic bullet out there that will make this economy grow as fast as we want it to. We will get through this, but it's just going to take a while. Thank you.
This is the Earth to World Broadcasting Network.